In this presentation, we'll take a look at the process of setting up bank feeds within QuickBooks Online. Here we are in our Get Great Guitars file. We're going to go down to the banking on the left-hand side. So we want to be in the banking tab. We want to be in the banking section up top. Then I'm going to close up this little hamburger up top, closing up the hamburger. I'm going to hold down Control, and I'm going to scroll up a little bit so we can see this a bit more. I'm at the 125. So that was holding down Control, scrolling up. So we have the automate income and expense tracking, save your hours by tracking finances automatically. And then we have the connect a bank or credit card to get started. So we can connect then the financial institutions, which would be the primary banks, and the credit card companies. So if you're looking and working with some of the larger banks and credit card companies, they will typically have this set up with QuickBooks Online, making this a fairly easy process. Actually setting up the bank feeds, typically a fairly easy process if you're at a fairly established institution, and QuickBooks has recognized that. There are some caveats that you want to think about when you do the bank tracking, and you want to think about, you know, how much data do you want to have, what's going to be the cutoff date that you want to put this data into the system as of. You'll note here we're starting in March, so really I want to have the information March going forward. You also just want to consider how that, you know, that first kind of bank reconciliation is going to have. Basically, you just don't want to have duplicated information. So you don't want to overlap the data input, or else you'll have the duplicate information in there. Now, note that some institutions may give you some restrictions in terms of, they might say that I only allow you to put the data in there on a monthly basis, rather than basically picking a date. Like in the middle of the month, you're like, I enter data up till the 15th of the month. I only want data after that point in time. Well, QuickBooks, some banks may not let you do that. Others may. So it just kind of depends on the bank as to what kind of options you have. But if you have to duplicate data, then you just delete some of the transactions that come over on the bank feeds, and that should be fine, and you're okay going forward. The other thing you want to consider, however, is that some people need bank feeds for the entire year, possibly. Possibly you're doing taxes or something like that, and you need the bank feeds for an entire year. It again is kind of dependent on the institution as to how much data they're going to give you that will allow you to do the bank feed option. So you may not, in other words, be able to get an entire year just by connecting to the bank, and therefore you may be able to, and usually if you're at a larger institution, you can actually go to QuickBooks, or go to the bank and look at the get the data and download the data that you can then import into QuickBooks Online. So those are some of the limitations that you want to consider. You want to consider, what date do I need this data to be as of? You're talking about the cash data. So what cash data do I have in the system? What don't I have in the system? If you have nothing in the system, right, you can just download whatever they're going to give you. And am I limited in some way to the amount of data? Do I need a whole year's worth of data, and am I limited to the amount of data that they will give me? If so, is there some other way I can get the data? Typically, go into the institution, the bank, and then seeing if you're able to download that information in some other way and then upload it. We'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the connection process then, once you think about those items, fairly straightforward. We're going to say just connect to the bank here. Also be aware that if you zoom in like I had before and you go to some of the functions within QuickBooks Online, it may kind of do some funny stuff. So if anytime something funny happens and you're zoomed in, then you're going to have to zoom back out, close whatever you're in, and go back into it. So here we have it. Let's get a picture of your profits, connect to your bank or credit card. Then you have the major banks down here. So if you're at one of these institutions, they have those down here that you can just select those items, and they're going to be integrated with QuickBooks Online. If you're at a smaller institution, QuickBooks Online will typically have, you know, they got a lot of banks in here. So then you would just search for whatever that institution would be. You know, here's some more institutions by name that you can look into as well. So you'd want to find the institutions that you're going to connect to and go through that process. Then once you find the institution, let's pick one such as Capital One here. And then it says start by connecting your Capital One account with Intuit, the makers of QuickBooks Online Edition. So Intuit's the owner. So when it refers to Intuit, just note that Intuit is the owner of QuickBooks Online. Go to the bank site to sign in and connect your accounts. Then we'll return here and bring you into your transactions. So you want to go connect. You're going to need basically the password information in order to allow the connection to be put in place. Then you can come back here and continue with this process. You'll typically then have a sign-in information here with the username and password for the bank so that you can have that connection happen. And that's basically going to be it. That you should be able to connect at that point in time and then be eligible to download the transactions from the bank.